2-minute warning. 2-minute warning.
Okay. Just have one item for all of you at the top. Obviously, an exciting day here at the White House, but also wanted to note that the president, which we announced, of course, but signed an executive order this morning on the implementation of the infrastructure bill, which laid out 6 main priorities to guide implementation, including investing public dollars efficiently, effectively, of course, avoiding waste and focusing on measurable outcomes for the American people, buying American and increasing the competitiveness of the U.S. economy, including through implementing the Act's Made in America requirements and bolstering domestic manufacturing and manufacturing supply chains, creating good-paying job opportunities for millions of Americans by focusing on high labor standards for these jobs, including prevailing wages and the free and fair chance to join a union, investing public dollars equitably, including through the Justice 40 initiative, which is a government-wide effort toward a goal that 40% of the overall benefits from federal investments in climate and clean energy flow to disadvantaged communities, building resilient infrastructure that can withstand the impacts of climate change, that helps combat the climate crisis, and finally, coordinating with state, local, tribal, and territorial governments in implementing these critical investments. We also announced yesterday that former Lieutenant Governor and former Mayor Mitch Landrieu will be leading this effort, and the executive order also started a task force that will include they'll be co-chaired by National Economic Council Director Brian Deese, and of course our new implementation coordinator Mitch Landrieu, and will include a number of members of our cabinet. With that, Colleen, welcome. I don't think I've engaged with you in the briefing yet, so welcome to the briefing room.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. So the bill is being signed, and now we're going to spend the money. So I wanted to ask a little bit about if the president has met the governors, about how the funds are going to be spent. And I wanted to know if you could talk a little bit more about the potential oversight mechanisms in place for how the public is going to be able to know how the money is spent.
Sure. Well, first I would note, and I know you are all eager to have a list of exactly who is attending today, and I expect someone will ask me that question. We are still getting attendees lists and people who are still RSVPing, believe it or not. This is sometimes how it works. It is open press. You will see the group. But let me just note, I know this wasn't your question, but since this is a popular one, some of the people who will be attending today, you reminded me of it when you asked about governors. Governor Kate Brown of Oregon, Governor Larry Hogan of Maryland, Governor John Bel Edwards of Louisiana, Mayor David Holt of Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, Mayor Steve Benjamin of Columbia, South Carolina. Again, this is not everyone, but just to give you a sense of the bipartisan group who will be attending. Also, members of Congress, as you know, because we put out, I think, the list of people who will be speaking. Of course, Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer will be in attendance. Other members of leadership, Senator Cassidy, Senator Collins, Senator Portman, Congressman Reed, Congressman Young, and others, as well as a number of business leaders, unions.
To start this week, how's he going to explain to the voters how the spending plan is going to help deal with inflation, supply chain issues?
Sure. Well, let me give you, I know he's going to speak in about an hour and a half, depending on how long the pre-program is, but a little bit of a preview of what you'll hear from him today, and I think that will also be an indication of how he'll talk about some of these plans when he's out in the country. One, you'll hear him convey today that he's also frustrated by the negativity and by the infighting that we've seen in Washington over the last couple of months. He's tired of it too, and that he knows that what the American people expect is that leaders are going to be talking about issues that matter to them, the issues that they're talking about at their kitchen tables, in their communities, in community centers, at their kids' soccer games, or whatever it may be. How can I get a good paying job? How can I make sure my kid will succeed? What are we doing to make sure that we are setting up the next generation for success in the future? And so what you'll hear him talk about today is how this bill, the bipartisan infrastructure plan, will impact people's everyday lives. You'll hear him convey that America is moving and life is going to get better for people across the country, and that this is part of his effort to finish the job, part of it, in getting the pandemic under control, making sure we are addressing rising costs, bringing costs down for the American people, and making us more competitive. So what you can expect to hear from him today is what I've just outlined, and as he goes around the country, he's really going to he's going to dig into how these issues, how the benefits of these packages will impact people's everyday lives, what they talk about at their kitchen tables. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. We've got the meeting later on today between President Biden and President Xi.
Yeah.
We've been told that there won't be a huge emphasis on trade. I wonder, though, given the fact that the U.S.-China trade agreement is nearing an end, China is still falling very short of its pledges to buy more goods and services. I'm wondering why that isn't going to be a bigger factor in that discussion.
Well, Andrea, I know we did a preview call last night, but let me reiterate a couple of the highlights of what will be the focus of the meeting, which we expect to run for a couple of hours later this evening virtually. One, the meeting, in our view, is an opportunity to set the terms of the competition with China in a way that reflects our interests and values, insists that the PRC play by the rules of the road. So there are areas, of course, of concern as it relates to the economy, where the president will certainly express his concern, express his view that China should be playing by the rules that the rest of the global community expects, raise our concerns with a number of their actions, and discuss areas where our interests align. As you know, Ambassador Tai gave a speech just a few weeks ago outlining our role in where we are in the phase one. She is running point, and the president entrusts her to lead these negotiations and discussions around trade, tariff reviews. That's why there's a lot to discuss in this discussion. There'll be a call late tonight, have your coffee now, to read out this call, and there could be a range of topics discussed, but it's really under her purview. He entrusts her to do that. He's regularly briefed. Well, the president did, as you know, Andrea, but just to get others up to speed, issue an executive order pausing oil and gas leasing on public lands and in offshore waters to facilitate the identification and implementation of long-needed permitting and leasing reforms. Shortly thereafter, the Interior Department canceled the pending offshore oil and gas lease in the Gulf of Mexico known as Lease Sale 257. So what you're referring to, I believe, is the fact that in June, a federal district court in Louisiana stopped the president's leasing pause and ruled that the Interior Department is legally required to go through with the sale of the Lease Sale 257, which is what what Andrea is referring to in terms of putting up a bunch of lease sales, oil and gas lease sales. We believe the decision is wrong, and the Justice Department is appealing it. So it's in the courts, it's in a legal process. We're required to comply with the injunction. It's a legal case and legal process, but it's important for advocates and other people out there who are following this to understand that it's not aligned with our view, the president's policies, or the executive order that he signed. Go ahead.
There's no more so you can't take any last-minute action to prevent this from going forward.
I would point you to the Justice Department. They, of course, are appealing this, and I would point you to them for any legal action or what their options are.
Just following up, it was tangentially related to China and trade. When you guys look at tariffs right now, do you view them purely through the prism of the administration's China strategy, or do you consider them as part of a potential tool in the tool belt as it relates to increased prices? I ask because the Treasury Secretary this weekend said if you pull off tariffs, it probably would make some difference in the price increases. You have business groups send a letter in the last couple of days asking the administration to consider easing them. Is that something you're viewing through the lens of the price increases, or is it purely separate and only along the lines of China strategy?
Well, it is part of the China strategy, but it is also something that, even while we've been pursuing phase one enforcement, which is what Ambassador Tai gave a speech about a couple of weeks ago, we've restarted our domestic tariff exclusions process to mitigate the effects of certain tariffs because, as you said, there are certain industries that are impacted, and there are areas where they don't generate strategic benefit, but they raise costs on Americans. So that is all a part of the review, and certainly part of the review is our China relationship is the backdrop for it, but also the impact on Americans, how we're strengthening the middle class is the priority and the focus for the president. I will say, just on the China meeting, one of the things too, as you look at this meeting and where it's falling, the president and the national security team feel that the president is coming into this meeting really from a position of strength. If you look at where we were 9-10 months ago, and if you look at how we outlined our approach to China many months ago, we talked about the importance of rebuilding our alliances, our relationships, coordinating with Europeans and other key partners in the world on how we're approaching this relationship. We have made enormous strides in building those relationships, including on the president's trip just 2 weeks ago, where he had a range of conversations. In addition, the president has also emphasized the need to come to this relationship, one, through the prison of competition, from a position of strength as it relates to what we're doing at home. Today, he is signing this infrastructure bill, and this infrastructure bill is essential and important for many reasons, but one of which is for the first time in 20 years, we will be investing more in infrastructure than China, and that is going to strengthen our competition at home in addition to putting millions of people to work.
And one more on the economy. The University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Survey came in at the lowest level since November of 2011. You look at the story that you guys have made clear you believe you have on what the president has accomplished in the last 10 months. You're also seeing all of your own numbers. What do you attribute that to? Is it just inflation? Is it coverage? Is it, what does the White House think is driving consumer sentiment to be at that low level?
Well, I would say, without being an economist, we look at most of these data points through the prism of COVID, and we know that we were in this place we are in now because of COVID, because of the impact of the pandemic. That has led to inflation, that has led to supply chain issues, and we know that even on a fundamental human level, people are tired of the pandemic. And so it's hard to get into the psychological mind, which this is a measure of course, different than some other data, but we see that consistently across a range of data and a range of economic analysis and even polling as it relates to how the current state of play in the country is impacting the American people. Go ahead.
In that same vein, can you just expand on that as it relates to the poll that came out this weekend? You've got the president's popularity down to 41%, approval on his handling of the economy down to 39%. And then you see the response to his legislation, which is pretty popular.
Yeah.
Where's the disconnect there? And that his legislation right now, infrastructure particularly, is significantly more popular than he is.
Well, what we see this as is an opportunity because we know that the president's agenda is quite popular, as you noted. And as you can see in the poll, the American Rescue Plan, the infrastructure deal are some of the most popular major pieces of legislation in the last 20 years. The bipartisan infrastructure deal and the Build Back Better agenda are very popular. And on COVID, polling shows their support for our vaccine requirements. We know also, and I've been doing press and communications for some time, I will tell you that you don't design a communication strategy around infighting within the Democratic Party in Washington. That is not how you typically design it. That has been a necessity in order to get this legislation done. And looking back, the president would have done the same thing because he wants to deliver for the American people. But now is an opportunity. Hasn't allowed for all of the time we would typically be out there talking about the benefits as the bill was not finalized. It wasn't finished. We're looking forward and eager to do that.
And just quickly on infrastructure, you said at the top that the president's message is going to be that it's going to get better, how this is going to lay out how this is going to impact our lives. What is the timeline on?
Been briefed on China's hypersonic test this summer, and does the president intend to bring up that hypersonic test in this meeting?
I'm not going to get into classified intelligence briefings with the president from here. Obviously, the president receives a presidential daily brief every single day, and certainly he is up to speed on anything our intelligence community is. Still does not consider him an old friend, so that remains consistent. You've heard the president note in the past that President Xi is somebody he's spent time with, he's had face-to-face conversations with, and because of that, the president feels that he's able to have candid discussions with President Xi, someone where he can with whom he can raise directly areas where we have concern, whether it's security issues, whether it's economic issues, whether it is human rights issues, and he will certainly do that this evening during the call. But he will also look for areas where we can work together, and where there are areas where there is cohesion of opportunity moving forward. So it gives him the opportunity, it gives him the ability, I should say, to approach this multi-hour meeting with a level of candor, to be direct, not to hold back, and to continue that moving forward. I'll note that because of the the condensing of power in China, that this relationship, these ongoing discussions between President Biden and President Xi, we feel is a key part of having intense diplomacy with a country that it's important to do that at this stage. So, but the long history helps enable him to do that effectively. Go ahead.
Thank you. Ahead of this meeting with President Xi, is President Biden considering a diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Olympics this winter?
Well, I know you're asking this because there have been reports out there, or questions, I should say, about whether or not President Xi will raise the question of the Beijing Olympics. We don't know if he will or will not, and we'll leave that to them to preview. But I don't have anything beyond that for you. I've outlined for you what the president will talk about and discuss in his meeting, and that's what our focus is on from this end.
Okay, there are a few reports from over the weekend that the vice president is unhappy. Can she expect the president's automatic endorsement if she decides to run herself in either 2024 or 2028?
Well, first of all, the president selected the vice president because to serve as his running mate because he felt she was exactly the person he wanted to have by his side to govern the country. She's a key partner, she's a bold leader, and she is somebody who has taken on incredibly important assignments, whether it is addressing the root causes of migration at the Northern Triangle or taking on a core cause of democracy in voting rights. So that is who the president selected. I don't have any predictions of whether she will run, when she will run. I will leave that to her, but I can tell you that there's been a lot of reports out there and they don't reflect his view or our experience with the vice president.
And so you guys have not heard that the vice president or key members of her staff are unhappy?
Here's what I know, Peter. I know that the president relies on the vice president for her advice, for her counsel. She's somebody who is not only taking on issues that are challenging. She's not looking for a cushy role here. No vice president is, no president is. And that she's somebody that is a valuable member of the team. And he expects to also, you can all expect to be out there out in the country on the infrastructure bill, and he's looking forward to having her out there too.
And then just something tied to an ongoing court case. Why did President Biden suggest that Kyle Rittenhouse on trial in Kenosha is a white supremacist?
So, Peter, what I'm not going to speak to right now is anything about an ongoing trial, nor the president's past comments. What I can reiterate for you is the president's view that we shouldn't have, broadly speaking, vigilantes patrolling our communities with assault weapons. We shouldn't have opportunists corrupting peaceful protests by rioting and burning down the communities they claim to represent anywhere in the country. As you know, closing arguments in this particular case, which I'm not speaking to, I'm just making broad comments about his own view. There's an ongoing trial. We're awaiting a verdict. Beyond that, I'm not going to speak to any individuals or this case.
But the president has spoken to it already. And his mom now, Kyle Rittenhouse's mom, came out saying that the president defamed her son, and that she claims that when the president suggested her son is a white supremacist, he was doing that to win votes. Is that what happened?
I just have nothing more to speak to an ongoing case where the closing arguments were just made. Go ahead.
Given the National Guard is on standby, though, in Wisconsin right now, Jen, does the White House or the President have any message to those who may stir up trouble, regardless of the outcome at the end of the Kyle Rittenhouse trial?
Well, I can give you a little bit of an update that we're in contact, the White House is in contact with state officials at the request of community leaders. The Department of Justice's Community Relations Service has provided trainings on de-escalation and contingency planning to local community organizations, and they're prepared to provide any further assistance that is needed. But, our message, I would say, is that President Biden ran on a promise to bring Americans together and to turn down the temperature on the angry, divisive rhetoric and actions we saw over the past 4 years. That's his overarching objective. It doesn't mean that he doesn't understand. Of course he does. When emotions are high, when passions are high, we're here to provide support. And obviously we're going to wait for any verdict to come out. And beyond that, certainly we are hopeful that any protest will be peaceful.
Broadly on the state of America right now, inflation obviously at a 31-year high right now. Americans are seeing their dollars, their paychecks stretched right now. Why should Americans not be concerned that injecting another $1.75 trillion or more would further raise inflation?
Because no economist out there is projecting that this will have a negative impact on inflation. And actually, what it will help do is will help increase economic productivity. It will help economic growth in this country. That and the Build Back Better agenda will help reduce inflation, will help cut costs for the American people over the long term.
But
As you acknowledge, that's over the long term. So I guess for those Americans who are really struggling with the bottom line right now, what is the president doing now, like immediately, to try to directly impact the rising costs that Americans are witnessing?
Well, the number one thing that the president can do is help get COVID under control. That we know is the root cause of inflation and the price increases we're seeing for a range of reasons. That is the best step that he can take, that the administration can take to help get it under control. I'd also note, though, in many of his proposals, but his Build Back Better agenda that is currently working its way through Congress, and we're eager for the House to pass this week, there are a number of components in there that will lower costs next year for the American people, cutting childcare costs in half, making preschool free for families starting in 2022, saving families $8,600, leading to the construction of additional housing units. We're seeing housing and the cost of rent as a major driver of costs for families across the country. And even on issues like negotiating prescription drugs. There are people across the country that are paying a lot of money out of pocket for insulin. It will cap the cost at $35. The president has a plan for lowering costs for the American people. No one is denying that inflation and any element of raising costs is an issue for the American people. The question is, what are the solutions? We're proposing solutions. In the short term, we have to continue to get COVID under control. In the medium and long term, we want to pass this agenda, which economists will tell you, including Nobel laureates, this will help address inflationary issues over the long term. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. We're seeing some reports that Russia carried out an anti-satellite weapons test over the weekend and potentially created some kind of debris in space. I'm wondering if the president's been briefed on that at all, and if the White House has a response beyond what we've heard from
I have seen these reports. I know that the State Department was going to issue a statement about it, so let me refer to them on any commentary on it at this point.
And then American journalist Danny Fenster has been freed from prison in Myanmar. I'm wondering if the U.S. was involved, the U.S. government was involved at all in his release.
I would again point you to the State Department. They would have the negotiating team that would have been engaged with any officials or others there playing a role in getting him released. I would point you to them for any more details.
I gotta ask you, so does the president intend to announce his pick for Fed chair this week?
We'll see. I have nothing to preview for you quite yet. I understand the interest.
Can you just confirm again that we're expecting to have a press conference with the heads of Mexico and Canada?
I have not. I know I said that last week. I have not. The schedule's constantly changing, so let me just take another fresh look at it, and we will confirm any details for you after the briefing. Go ahead, Shelby.
Thanks. There's been reporting indicating that there's a lower vaccination rate in some of the intelligence agencies. Congressman Chris Stewart has said that some are up as high as 40% unvaccinated. There's also been similar reporting on vaccine holdouts at key military bases. Real Clear Politics said there's around 10% of highly educated and trained personnel refusing the vaccine at one of their top weapons testing bases. So with the vaccine deadlines looming, is the administration concerned about the impact on national security if some of these percentages remain high? And secondly, is there any sort of contingency plan in place in the event that we see a number of personnel taken off because of this mandate?
Well, I would first point you to the Department of Defense. Their uptick numbers of people who are getting vaccinated are quite high. So that's not consistent with what I have heard, and they can give you more specific details. I don't know if this is applicable to the agencies that you have mentioned, but we know in some components of the federal government, we're in a little bit of a delay in people entering the information and data for their vaccination status, and that's something that we're encouraging people and workers to update as needed as we lead up to the timeline. So that does not sound consistent with the data that I understand to be accurate, but I would point you to any agency on the specific percentages within their agencies.
So there's no concern about a number of personnel in any of these agencies having to leave the workforce because they're not vaccinated?
Well, those numbers are not consistent with what I understand to be accurate, so I would point you to the agencies on the numbers and the specific percentages per agency. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. One on China and one on infrastructure. You just mentioned, again, as part of your broader China strategy, working with allies, coordinating with them. In anticipation of tonight's meeting, have you briefed partners in Asia and Europe on sort of what you hope to achieve from this meeting? And do you plan to give them a readout after, how it went, where you might have to coordinate with them?
Yes, we are in regular contact. The president saw a number of allies and partners just 2 weeks ago. Our State Department officials, our national security team are in regular touch, and I'm sure there will be continued coordination after the meeting.
Great. And then one more on Mitch Landrieu. In his new role, is he expected to be involved in the effort to promote the infrastructure package around the country, traveling like other cabinet members are going to be doing? Is that part of his role?
We'll see. I think he will be traveling, as I noted, with the president tomorrow, but I expect, at least for the early stages, that his focus will be keeping his head down and getting the implementation off the ground. He is a very effective communicator, a former mayor, a former lieutenant governor, so I'm sure we will utilize him to be out there explaining the implementation plan as well. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. On Belarus, the situation in Belarus, is there anything specific that you can share that the White House is doing or can do to help in a situation, such as the president considering a call with Putin, as some other leaders have?
I don't have anything to preview on that front for you. We continue to work in close contact, or stay in close contact, I should say, with our EU partners and other allies who are working to hold the Lukashenko regime accountable for its ongoing attack. And that includes preparing follow-up sanctions in close coordination with them. So we're working to continue coordination with them on these efforts. I don't have anything in terms of a Putin call to preview.
Any indication that Russia is involved indirectly, directly, in any fashion or form?
I don't have anything on that from here.
On one other question, can you share some details about tomorrow? It's a swing state. Why New Hampshire, and why this particular bridge?
Sure. Let me just say one thing on the last piece, just so I note it. Well, I don't have anything to convey in terms of engagement. I can tell you that we are still calling on Russia and encouraging them directly to use its influence to pressure the Lukashenko regime to cease its callous exploitation and coercion of vulnerable people. There's no question they have that relationship and that ability to impact. Okay, to go to your New Hampshire question quickly, switching topics. The president is going there because there is a broken down bridge that needs to be repaired. And it's an opportunity to highlight how this infrastructure bill can help communities, help people who are taking their kids to school, help people who are holding their breath as they're going across bridges, worrying about the safety and security of how they're traveling, to do exactly that. So that's why he's headed to New Hampshire tomorrow, to highlight this bridge that is decrepit and needs to be rebuilt, and show people visually what the impact will be so they can understand how it will help impact their lives. Go ahead.
You just talked about how the infrastructure bill is one of the reasons why the White House thinks President Biden is coming into this meeting tonight with President Xi with a position of strength. But legislation in Congress that would actually address boosting competitiveness against China, the USICA, or the formerly known Endless Frontiers Act, is pending in Congress.
So many names.
I know. So I'm wondering if the White House is doing anything to advance that bill in the House and to dislodge it, or do they prefer this other version that House Democrats are working on?
So the president is certainly eager to see USICA pass, and he believes it is would be an important step forward, an important opportunity, perhaps in a bipartisan manner, to send the message about our commitment to, helping industries and make us more competitive here in the United States. I would say, though, that the reason why the infrastructure bill is such an important component of our competition is because we are at the point now where we are about 13th in the world in terms of our infrastructure around the country, and we're seeing, even as it relates to supply chain issues, that we need to do a lot more to ensure that goods and services can move across our country. China has done more to invest. So it is a very key and pivotal component of of the president's commitment to approaching the relationship from a position of strength. But we are eager to see it pass. We're engaged with members and leadership in the Hill. I don't have anything from here in terms of the particular components of it, but we would like to see the bill passed, yes. Go ahead.
On that front, is there any hope in the White House that this bill that he signed today will not be a one-off and will in fact be like a turning point for future bipartisan agreements like USICA or others? Like, what's your assessment of whether he can turn this into political momentum?
Well, I think today what we're focused on is the fact that there hasn't been a big historic impactful bipartisan bill signing at the White House in some time. I guess there's a lot of ways to view that, and the president is grateful, and he will note this in his remarks, for the support of everyone from Mitch McConnell to a range of members in both sides, both houses, who supported this legislation because they think it's the right thing for the American people, the right thing for their states. The president will continue to, the door of the Oval Office will continue to be open to working in a bipartisan fashion. And the president's view is there are many ways that we can do exactly that, and that's what the American people expect. They expect and hope for us to be able to work across the aisle. He'll also note that he is a president who believes that consensus is a good thing, that compromise is a good thing, and that is how you get things done in this town, and that we can't be so stiff in what we believe and our way or the highway in order to get things done. And he's hopeful that that sends a message that he is open to and eager to have opportunities to continue to work together. But he can't determine how everybody's going to vote in Congress. We know that, but he is somebody who wants to govern for all people, pursue opportunities to work in a bipartisan way. Today is a great example of that, and we'll continue to look for ways to do it moving forward.
Does he have any expectation that out in the country, this success, this ceremony will translate into an improvement in his poll numbers, his handling of the economy, any of that?
Well, as I said a little bit earlier, there's no question that being able to go out there and talk about and sell a package that actually exists and we know the details of is easier than the alternative. And the president will be out there tomorrow. He'll be out there Wednesday. The vice president will be out there around the country. Cabinet members will be out there talking about how these packages benefit the American people and the direct impact they're going to have on their lives. We can't predict for you what that will mean 2 months, 6 months from now, but there's no question that that is a more positive means of communicating from here than litigating every up and down of the sausage making in Congress. Go ahead.
Yeah, is it the White House's expectation that the House will take action, take up a vote on the Build Back Better plan before the Thanksgiving break? Where are you seeing things right now in terms of timing on that?
Well, I would note for you that when a number of House moderates, put out a statement a couple of weeks ago, they conveyed that this was the week that they felt was the time to move forward on this legislation. We agree. They've been waiting for justification, validation, I would say, of the White House projections on the pay-fors in the legislation. We've seen that every component of information the CBO has put out has been consistent with our projections. There have been a number of other outside economists and experts who've also conveyed that the nature of this legislation. So we're hopeful that we will continue to move forward toward getting this bill passed this week, as has been the plan for some time now.
Would you view it as a setback if there's not a vote this week?
We plan to move forward. We're not going to call votes from here. We'll leave that to the speaker, but we're moving forward. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. To follow up on what you've said about bipartisanship, by our count, there's just 6 of the 32 Republicans in the House and Senate who voted for the bipartisan bill that will actually be there at the signing ceremony today. Is the president frustrated that more Republicans aren't coming so he can highlight, actually with everybody around him, the bipartisan work that went into this bill?
The president believes that today is an opportunity to celebrate a bipartisan success that will have a huge impact on the American people. He invited everybody who supported it because he felt that was the right thing to do. Whether people come or not, that's their choice. The president will still be elevating, talking about the impact of this package as a bipartisan package that will help the American people. I would also note that one of the other things he'll highlight is that we're going to work with governors and mayors, and he'll continue to highlight in the days ahead, I should say, to implement this moving forward. And we don't do that through the prism of somebody's political affiliation. He's going to work with, and Mitch Lander will be working with Democratic governors, Republican governors, Democratic mayors, Republican governors, mayors, and really what is most important to the American people is what we do from here and how it's going to impact them and make their lives better, less than the attendance at a bill signing.
And that gets into my next question. The New York governor said today that there will be no MTA fare hike because of the funding that's coming from this infrastructure bill. Do you have other examples of immediate impact just like that? Like, what can we see in the next couple of days?
We will. Look, I think the president's signing this bill today. The implementation coordinator is starting his job today. We will certainly have more updates in terms of immediate impact in the days and the weeks ahead. Obviously, some governors and mayors can anticipate roads that will be rebuilt, big bridges that will be rebuilt that are long overdue, how this will help replace lead pipes that are in schools and people's homes across the country, making sure families, and the president will talk about this today, who have been sitting in McDonald's or Walmart parking lots to get their kid broadband access, moving forward soon, they won't need to do that anymore. So you will see mayors and governors talk about that in the weeks and days, weeks, months ahead. But we're just at the beginning of implementation. We're eager to get it started as quickly as possible. George, go ahead.
Yeah, in your answer to Colleen, you talked about the short-term campaign. Let me ask you about longer term. You were here in 2010 when President Obama signed the ACA, gave a couple of speeches, and then moved on. Is this going to be longer term selling? Are we going to see him a year from now at bridges and so on, or is it?
A year from now is an eternity away. I will note. The president wants to spend some sustained time out there communicating with the country. There's a lot of ways to do that. Certainly he loves getting out in the country. No one loves a bridge or rail more than President Biden. So you will certainly see him out there. You'll see the vice president out there quite a bit over the coming weeks as well. You'll see cabinet members out there as well, fanning across the country and talking about the direct impacts on people's lives. So you can certainly anticipate, George, that a couple weeks, months from now, we will have a whole bevy of events and photos and interviews that the team here will have done, including the president, to go out there and communicate directly with the American people.
Thanks.
Oh, okay, one more, and then we'll go. One more, go ahead.
Thank you. I want to ask you, even though you said earlier you're not going to comment necessarily on the trials that's happening, but when we look at the case, Ahmaud Arbery trial, and we're seeing what's happening on the outside of this trial, and then you have one where just a pastor, Reverend Jesse Jackson, coming into a courtroom is seen as threatening. And then 100 pastors coming this Thursday to pray outside of the courtroom. What was the president's response to that? Even though the judge, reprimanded the lawyers, however, it still speaks to what's happening in our criminal justice system, the unfairness, even in the Rittenhouse trial. How race is really still taken precedence over in both cases, and people are wondering what's happening next.
I appreciate your question, and I just want to be clear that what I don't want to comment on from here is ongoing trials where there are, where the cases are being heard, where the jury is still making decisions, and that's just a responsibility we have from here. I have as the spokesperson, right, for the White House. I will note that, of course, the president has watched, and you've heard him talk about the impacts that what he has seen across the country, protests, the emotions, racial injustice, whether it's in our legal system or it's in policing and the reforms that need to happen. And that is something where there's not one event, of course. There are many events that have deeply impacted him and made this a priority for him and this White House. I know as there are verdicts and as there are, we will have more to say, but I just am limited in what I can convey beyond that from here. Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you, everyone.
week ahead in Washington, and talk a little bit about the other budget and government funding deadlines that are hanging over Congress right now, and what impact they could have on the floor time and sort of the legislative planning here for the Build Back Better Act.
That's right. That's a great question. The timeline that we're looking at right now is it's already tight. It's the middle of November, so it sounds strange to say that it's tight. But if the House were to pass the Build Back Better Act this week, there is no time for the Senate to do it before the Thanksgiving holiday, which of course is next week, when both the House and the Senate will be gone. So now you're looking at December, and they come back and they're already leaning up against a December 3rd government shutdown deadline. The government funding authorization expires on December 3rd. They've got to pass something to either extend it short term or something longer term, which would take even more heavy lifting. On top of that, there is the debt ceiling, which you remember back in September was a big fight, and Mitch McConnell, who had vowed not to help the Democrats with the debt ceiling, he kind of caved in September and said, okay, we'll do it for short term. We'll do it till December 3rd, same deadline. But we're not going to help you next time. So if there are no Republican votes or very few Republican votes for lifting the debt ceiling in December, then you're looking at a government default, which has never happened in the history of the country, and a lot of economists warn that it would be sort of economic Armageddon, not just here but globally. So if you're pushing Build Back Better, this enormous, massive package into, it's going to be competing for floor time with these two other huge bills that have to hit the floor at exactly the same time. So both the House and the Senate right now claim that they're going to be out of Washington on December 13th. But if you're a betting man, you wouldn't put any money on it. No one's buying plane tickets home for the holidays just yet, because this could be a long December with all of these deadlines. And then the other piece of this is the NDAA. This is the Pentagon funding authorization, which is hugely popular, always bipartisan. It's a $778 billion bill to fund the Pentagon. Passed the House in September with overwhelming support, and Charles Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, supports it, wants to bring it to the floor, but because it's going to take up some time, there's going to be amendments, all the process that goes on in the Senate. He doesn't want to occupy this huge chunk of floor time if Build Back Better is going to come over, if he's got to do government funding, if he's got to do debt ceiling. So now he's vowing this week to try to do the Pentagon spending bill while he waits for the House to pass Build Back Better. So he has a little bit of a window of time, and he's going to try to do Pentagon spending this week. Whether they can do it by the end of the week, I guess, remains to be seen.
So just a couple things for a congressional reporter to cover, you're saying?
That's right.
Mike Lillis, taking your phone call. Steve, Anaheim, California, Republican. Good morning.
Good morning, Jonathan. Mike, you answered my question earlier of how they were going to do how they were going to pass it through the Senate, because I don't think McConnell is going to allow any of his members to vote. You're absolutely right about that. But do you think the Democrats made a mistake by breaking these two bills apart, because they pretty much lost their leverage, don't you think? That's it, Jonathan.
Thanks, Steve. Mike Lillis.
Yeah, Steve, that's a great question. If you had asked the liberals, they would have agreed with you wholeheartedly. That was the whole reason that they did not want to break them apart, and they were insisting that the Build Back Better Act come to the floor first before they were going to vote for infrastructure. And again, because of the thin margins over there, they would have had the leverage to block the infrastructure bill, the more popular bill. What happened not last Friday, a week before, as the liberals and the moderates in the House sat down, they were in a room until almost midnight on Friday, and they hashed out a deal where the liberals caved, and they said, we will take your word, talking to the moderates, we'll take your word that you will vote for the Build Back Better Act and we'll vote for infrastructure today. Just get the ball rolling, get Joe Biden a win. And but when the CBO score comes in, if it comports with the White House numbers, then you have to vote for the larger bill. And so that's where we are right now. It's a non-binding agreement. It was funny that the liberals had held out for months and months and months opposing the infrastructure bill, not on policy but on process. And then at the last minute, they said, well, we'll vote for it with this it was literally a 2-sentence statement from the moderates. So there has not been a lot of trust between those two camps, and suddenly the liberals said, we'll trust you. So that's where we are, and they, the moderates could always renege. Manchin could always put his foot down and say, I've already got infrastructure, which was the thing that I wanted, and the other stuff is too big, especially with the inflation spike. He has been very vocal about his concern over inflation, and he thinks that another huge influx of government spending might exacerbate it. So this is Congress. Anything can happen, but there's a lot at stake also for the Democrats. I mentioned Biden's falling poll numbers. You saw the results of elections around the country in state races a couple Tuesdays ago. They are kind of in crisis mode, and they want to get some victories. They want to get some pucks in the net, as some of them up there would say. And so there's a lot at stake, and it sounds like they think they have all the votes to get this done. Again, the process is messy, but it's a good question about separating those two bills, because there was always this idea that they had to be separate, but they had to be married for one group. And the moderates, they had said all along, this is all about deficit spending, but by agreeing to vote on Build Back Better this week without a full accounting from the CBO, they sort of revealed that the deficit spending wasn't the only thing. They just wanted to separate the two bills, go home to their districts and claim a big bipartisan win on a popular infrastructure bill, and claim that it was separate from the larger bill that is less popular, more partisan, and is going to be used on the campaign trail against them.
How much you've been covering the 1-6 Select Committee?
Oh, on and off. I don't cover it. We have others in the office who cover it more closely, but it's certainly a backdrop of all of these conversations.
Lynn with a question on Twitter, just on the latest news from there. Do you think that the 1-6 committee will hold Mark Meadows in contempt, along with others who ignored subpoenas, as Steve Bannon is preparing to show up in court today? Bannon, of course, indicted last week by a federal grand jury on 2 counts of contempt of Congress after failing to comply with a subpoena from the committee.
Right, it's a good question. And the answer is yes. I mean, I think after the DOJ was under a lot of criticism from members of both parties, from the Adam Kinzingers and Liz Cheney's of the world, as well as pretty much every Democrat. Why is Merrick Garland not pursuing this? And so there was a lot of excitement and a lot of praise on Friday when they announced the Bannon indictment, and immediately Benny Thompson, who's the chairman of the Select Committee, and Liz Cheney, the vice chairman, put out a statement and said, this is indication, Mark Meadows and others who do not want to cooperate with our investigation, you're on notice that you'll be next. So I think the answer is yes.
Ketchum, Idaho. Ned, Independent. Good morning.
Hi, morning, guys. Yeah, Mike, the defense authorization bill it is extremely important that they address that. It is such a mess. We don't even know. Our military is scattered across the world right now. With the whole Afghanistan thing, they had to divert so many carriers and air wings to do that airlift. Then, if you recall, there was an earthquake in Haiti that, we had to respond with Southcom to do that. We're trying to modernize the thing, the whole Defense Department, but also pivot to the Pacific right now. The other problem is our use of our National Guard. They're having to deploy 500 troops for the trial in Ohio, because they might riot. Our National Guard is overstretched right now, really bad for responding to wildfires and everything.
Well, Ned, we'll take it. Mike Lillis on the NDAA, and isn't that usually one of the less political bills in Congress?
Yeah, it's always one of the most popular. The question is not whether it will pass. The question is just when, and that's just an issue of Schumer picking some floor time. And as I mentioned, he is shooting to do that this week. There are a couple kind of controversial elements to this one. the House Democrats in there put a stipulation that women will now be required to register for selective service. You know, we don't have a draft, but men, when they turn 18 in this country, still have to register with the selective service, and there are penalties for those who do not do so. There are a lot of conservatives who don't like that provision, and so there's a thinking that some of those Senate conservatives will offer amendments to strip that language. Schumer is going to have a lot of control over what amendments can hit the floor, and so that one might not be one of them. But there are a couple little sticking points like that. There's also, Schumer has expressed a lot of interest in voting to repeal the 2002 war authorization that empowered Bush to go to Iraq. That's been around for almost 20 years, and a lot of people on both sides of the aisle think that it is no longer relevant and should be repealed, and the NDAA might be the vehicle to do it. So there are some controversial elements in it, but for the most part, 99.5% of it is not controversial. This money goes to every district in every state of the country. And in fact, the $778 billion figure is $25 billion more than even the Pentagon requested. So this happens all the time where you know, this is free money for districts, and lawmakers love to bring home the bacon. The defense bill is an easy way to do it. It's a non-controversial way to do it, and it'll happen.
Less than 10 minutes left with Mike Lillis this morning. This is Claudia, White Mills, Pennsylvania, Republican. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you doing?
Doing well. What's your question or comment?
My question is, I'm a Republican living in a Democratic state, and you know, I watch so much of this politics going on you know, the news. And they never focus enough on us seniors who live on fixed incomes. You know, they're always talking about tax credits for people with children. I mean, how do they expect the seniors to, you know, survive in this country? Like, you know, when are they going to start helping to take care of the seniors?
Mike Lillis, on provisions in Build Back Better that may focus on those issues or don't?
Yeah, no, there are several in there. They don't go as far as some would have liked. The biggest fight that they've had over this was an expansion of Medicare, and you had a number of liberal Democrats, Bernie Sanders being the most notable one, who wanted to expand Medicare to include vision, hearing, and dental coverage. And Manchin in the Senate was opposed to that, and so it was pared back. And in fact, Biden's framework, which he introduced a few weeks ago, only included hearing, and the House bill that is expected to pass this week only includes hearing. Whether or not Sanders tries to amend that to expand it to include the other two, when it gets to the Senate, we do not know. We don't know. You know, is that a red line for Manchin, or could he be appeased with other things? That's a debate to come. There is also home care for the elderly. There is also, what else? I'm just trying to think. There's public housing vouchers. There's things like that that can affect the elderly. But there's certainly, I mean, there's hundreds of billions of dollars in there for elder care, as well as, you know, the education benefits that are going to affect the younger generations, as you rightly point out.
Houston, Texas. Rodney, Independent. Good morning.
Good morning.
Go ahead, sir.
I'm wondering why they keep leaving the senior citizens out, the elderly. I'm disabled. I can't work, and trying to live on what they give us a month, it's just killing us. We can't even afford to eat or anything, file for food stamps or anything, and they talk about, oh, you make too much. And it's just stupid. I worked 2 and 3 jobs all my life, paid my taxes, to have to sit here and starve, and the seniors need the help. Not all this other bullcrap, them sending all our tax dollars to the other countries and not helping the senior citizens here in our own country.
Rodney, what would be the quickest and best way to help you?
They could at least send us a stimulus check or something to help us get bills. I got everything I own sitting in a pawn shop and can't even afford to get it out because been waiting on a stimulus that they ain't never sending. And I've been stuck having to pay the interest for over a year just trying to get it out. And it's just to the point of, I don't know what the hell is going on.
Rodney, thanks for sharing your story. Mike Lillis, Rodney was talking there about another stimulus check was something that could help him. Is that even something that's being debated right now or being offered?
It's not a part of this most recent package. There have been 2 rounds of stimulus over the last year and a half. Most recently in the bill that passed in March, but that's kind of the last we've heard of the direct stimulus. And Rodney is voicing concerns that we're hearing quite often, including the call right before him. And there are a ton of bills up on Capitol Hill to expand Social Security, to expand Medicare, to lower the age of Medicare, to make the benefits more generous. As I mentioned, some of those are included in Build Back Better. There's home care provisions in Build Back Better. But for the most part, the expanding entitlements is a very controversial idea because then you get cries of that it's socialized medicine, that it's socialism, that it's government overreach, that it's too expensive. You often hear that Medicare and Social Security are about to go bankrupt, which is not quite the case, but it's a good talking point for those fiscal hawks out there who are concerned about rising debt. And it's a very powerful argument on the campaign trail. So that's the fight that we've been having literally since Medicare and Social Security were created. Is it the government's role, one, to take care of the elderly, and if so, to what extent do we do it? And it's largely a partisan issue. But if you remember, George Bush he enacted the largest expansion of Medicare since the program's founding in 2003 when he created this prescription drug benefit. And so at times it has been a bipartisan effort, and just not right now. Right now you're hearing that the expansion of Medicare is government overreach and should not be done as part of this bill or any other. So we're back to the partisanship on entitlements, and for Rodney, that's why we haven't expanded them.
Before we let you get your actual work week started, as we wrap up the week ahead in Washington, what haven't we talked about that you're going to be watching for this week in Congress?
I think you touched on it with the January 6th commission. That's moving very, very quickly. They've already subpoenaed, I think, 35 people, and you can expect more, any day, every day. They want to get rolling on that investigation. They don't want it to be a political football, at least they say, come November of next year. Benny Thompson has said he wants to wrap that up by early spring, and to do so, they're going to have to really get cracking. And so all eyes on January 6th, even as they wait for the Build Back Better vote. But there's nothing really on the calendar right now. There's some suspension votes. House comes in today, and there's some suspension votes on the calendar, which just means that they're bipartisan, non-controversial bills that everybody's going to vote for, and they kind of put those in as placekeepers, as ways to get guys into town and vote on some non-controversial things while they wait for something bigger. In this case, it's the Build Back Better Act. And in the Senate, kind of the same thing. They're going to start moving on NDAA. There are a couple nominations for some deputies at the Treasury and the Ag Department, but mostly everyone is just in wait-and-see mode to see what comes out of this debate over Biden's agenda. And in the meantime, everyone's talking about Biden's polling numbers. It's been a really, really tough couple months for the administration and for Democrats, and so there's a lot at stake here. And again, they want to switch the conversation from process, which is dry and messy, and get on to talking about benefits, which they hope to get out the door very quickly.
House in at 2 p.m. today, the Senate in at 3 p.m. today.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Leader Chuck Schumer, Senator Rob Portman, Senator Kirsten Sinema, Mayor Aquanetta Warren, and Ms. Donetta Williams. Please welcome Donetta Williams, member of the local Steelworkers 1025.
Welcome to the White House on this very historic day. I am so honored and happy to be here and elated to see President Biden, Vice President Harris, members of the cabinet and members of the Congress, members of my local union, brothers and sisters. Is this not a great day to sign a bill? I am Donetta Williams. I'm an optical fiber maker at Corning in Wilmington, North Carolina. Our 326 members there and the steel workers throughout our great union supply America. We have the materials and components needed in our nation's infrastructure. Investments in infrastructure are critical to workers like me, my brothers and sisters in other industries, and I was so proud to join them to help pass this bill you will sign today, President Biden. One of the most excited part about this bill, the $65 billion upgrade to expand broadband in communities across the country. Communities like mine and rural North Carolina. This is not just an investment in broadband, but in jobs at Corning, where I make fiber, and investments in fellow North Carolinas. This job will help everyone have access to this bill will help everyone have access to the internet that they need to teach their children, run their businesses, and sell products from their farms. These jobs are important. Working at Corning making optical fiber, I've been there 26 years. It helped me raise my daughter, who's now 30. As a single mom, I was able to have health care provided, able to send her to school to get an education, and it has allowed me to contribute to my local economy and community. And it also helped me contribute to the tax base that's needed for essential for essential items. We need it, y'all. So hey, it has. I just want to thank President Biden. I want to thank him for investing in me, workers like me, my brothers and sisters, all throughout this great United States. I just want to thank you and thank you for your bold leadership and vision. And thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And now it is my honor to introduce the mayor of Fontana, California, Aquanetta Warren.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Mr. President and distinguished guests. I'm Aquanetta Warren, Mayor of Fontana, California, a city of 220,000 in San Bernardino County. I'm honored to be here and represent small and mid-sized communities in America. This bill, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, is designed to help all of us, big, small, and in between. The bill brought together both Republicans and Democrats and will address the critical needs of our community by putting millions of Americans to work and providing long-term funding to address our nation's crumbling infrastructure. I congratulate not only President Biden on this tremendous accomplishment, but the members of Congress, including my representatives, Norma Torres and Pete Aguilar, of both parties who voted for this. I attended many meetings regarding this bill, virtually, of course. I attended these meetings and I was so struck by the bipartisan nature of the discussions. It doesn't matter whether you were a Republican or a Democrat. You work together to put the safety and efficiency of American people first. This bill will invest millions and produce countless jobs for cities such as Fontana. It will improve roadways, transit systems, our access to clean water, and millions of Americans their ability to access high-speed internet and bridge the digital divide. This bill will also address climate change, and it is a major step forward in protecting our communities against fire, drought, and floods. After the Great Depression, Roosevelt had his New Deal, putting Americans back to work and bringing forth programs that are still with us generations later. Social Security, unemployment insurance, and federal agricultural subsidies. Now, after a pandemic that has shaken the global economy at its core, we have this newer deal, one that will put America back while protecting and advancing our infrastructure for generations to come. You know, Mr. President, I've been working on infrastructure since I was elected as mayor in 2010. I just have to thank the members of Congress and thank you, Mr. President, for making this a reality. Thank you.
Please welcome Senator Kyrsten Sinema.
Oh, thank you. You know, you'll hear a lot today about what this historic legislation means for everyday Americans, from better roads to stronger electric grids, to cleaner water, to faster internet in more places. Our plan will create millions of jobs and make our country stronger, safer, and more globally competitive without raising taxes on everyday Americans. You may have heard less about new policies in our bill that do not grab the same media attention, but will make a big difference. States like Arizona that are confronting historic drought will see billions of dollars to strengthen water systems throughout the American West. Communities will see historic investments to prevent and recover from wildfires. Land ports of entry, key national security infrastructure and commercial hubs will see major upgrades. And our bill makes significant investments in tribal communities' infrastructure, including all necessary funding to complete authorized Indian water rights settlements. Beyond historic financial resources, our plan includes a significant update of transportation policy. From strengthening public transit in mid-sized communities, to new technologies preventing impaired driving, to new federal positions to raise the voices of tribal communities in infrastructure policy. Our legislation represents the substantive policy changes that some have said are no longer possible in today's Senate. How many times have we heard that bipartisanship isn't possible anymore, or that important policy can only happen on a party line? Our legislation proves the opposite. And the senators who negotiated this legislation show how to get things done. The senators in our group of 10 effectively represented the needs of the regions we represent, Senator Cassidy in the Deep South, Senator Warner in the Mid-Atlantic, Senator Manchin in Appalachia, and Senators Romney and Tester in the West. And the Northeast and Alaska, each with unique needs, were ably represented by Senators Shaheen, Collins, and Murkowski, the wonder women of our group, always focused on the practical outcomes. And I sincerely thank my partner in co-leading this long effort, Senator Rob Portman, whose knowledge of the federal budget is matched only by his steadfast commitment to delivering on this priority for America. Delivering this legislation for the American people, this is what it looks like when elected leaders set aside differences, shut out the noise, and focus on delivering results on the issues that matter most to everyday Americans. I look forward to the work that we will all do together to implement this historic legislation. Thank you.
Please welcome Senator Rob Portman.
Kirsten, thank you very much, and it was great being your partner in this. I've heard you say, in fact, I've heard President Biden say that this infrastructure bill that will be signed today is going to have a positive impact on every single American. And that's true. This is true today. It'll be true for decades to come. And I want to congratulate everyone gathered here today for the role you played in making this possible. This is what can happen when Republicans and Democrats decide we're going to work together to get something done. The bipartisan process that resulted in this historic investment began with a meeting about 8 months ago with my colleague, Senator Sinema, whose persistence was absolutely key to us being here today. We met, frankly, in response to the initial Biden infrastructure plan, which included tax increases and also included substantial investments in so-called human infrastructure. By removing the tax hikes and shrinking the package to only fund core infrastructure, we saw an opportunity to find bipartisan consensus on finally fixing our nation's outdated infrastructure. And from there, the group quickly grew to the G10 negotiators. They were just mentioned, but I got to mention them again. Senators Susan Collins, Mitt Romney, Lisa Murkowski, Bill Cassidy, Joe Manchin, Jeanne Shaheen, Mark Warner, and John Tester. 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats. It ultimately grew to 22 senators, evenly divided by party, in a partnership with the House Problem Solvers Caucus, led by Brian Fitzgerald and Josh Gottheimer. Give them a round of applause. Senator Mitch McConnell, to his credit, supported our efforts to find a way forward and eventually lent his critical support. Senator Shelley Moore Capito helped lay the foundation for our success in her White House discussions and also in her committee work with Senator Tom Carper. Our work was guided by a few simple principles: core infrastructure only, no tax increases, and no linkage to the broader partisan reconciliation process. Instead, we agreed this would be a truly bipartisan process, working from the middle out, not the top down. There were plenty of bumps along the way, but we got there because we were all committed to ultimately delivering a result for the constituents we represent. We also got there because of a lot of smart, hardworking staff, as usual. I want to commend my team as well as the staff of our G10 members, and I want to commend the White House negotiators, led ably by Steve Ricchetti and supported by Brian Deese. Every president and every Congress in modern times has proposed major infrastructure improvements. They all have. By making infrastructure a real priority in his administration, President Trump furthered the discussion and helped Republicans like me think differently about the positive impact of investment in core infrastructure. And core infrastructure is what this law is all about. It's about roads and bridges and rail and transit and ports and airports and water systems, the electric grid, broadband, and more. We've got a major bridge in my hometown, and it's also a major bottleneck, desperately in need of replacing. We've been trying to do it for 25 years, but we haven't been able to pull together the funding and figure out how to do it. This new law finally gives us the tools we need to fix the Brent Spence Bridge, and the same is true for major projects all around the country. That's why you see so many of my colleagues here from every region of the country, because they know this is going to help to create more economic efficiency, more productivity, and maybe lessen that commute for their constituents. This long-term investment in our nation's capital assets will grow the economy because of that efficiency and that productivity. It'll create hundreds of thousands of new jobs. It'll make us more competitive against countries like China, who are investing heavily in infrastructure, much more than we have been. Maybe most importantly, at a time of surging inflation, these long-term investments are actually going to help. Inflation, of course, is caused when demand outstrips supply. And in this case, we're not funding stimulus spending that adds to the demand side, but ports and freight rail and roads and bridges and other assets that will help on the supply side. That's why economists say this bill is counter-inflationary, which is so important right now, as American families are facing higher prices on everything from gas to groceries. This new law also includes landmark permitting reforms to reduce timelines for infrastructure projects while maintaining environmental and safety standards. We want taxpayer-funded infrastructure projects to be done as cost-effectively as possible, right? Get them done on time and under budget. This bipartisan support for this bill comes because it makes sense for our constituents. But the approach from the center out should be the norm, not the exception. The increasing polarization of our country is keeping us from getting things done, and we have a responsibility to do better. The American people want us to see us coming together. They know that despite our differences, we should be able to figure it out and work together to solve big problems. We can start by recognizing that finding common ground to advance the interests of the American people should be rewarded, not attacked. Mr. President, in a moment you're going to sign this bill. I will say that you and I will disagree on the tax and spending and the other priority you have, the reconciliation bill, but I think we can both agree that this infrastructure investment shouldn't be a one-time bipartisan accomplishment. This should be the beginning of a renewed effort to work together on big issues facing our country. Again, I want to thank everybody who's here today for what you did to make this possible. Thank you.
We need to order. Please welcome Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President, for inviting us to the White House. Thank you to Vice President Harris, my colleagues in attendance, all of you, and Senator Sinema, Portman, and Speaker Pelosi. Now, for years, Americans were promised that an infrastructure bill was coming. Today, we're telling the American people that an infrastructure bill is finally here. Thank you, President Biden. At the start of this year, we told American families that we'd meet our challenges, the challenges of our time, with boldness and with courage. Now they're getting one of the largest infrastructure bills ever. To paraphrase one of my favorite former vice presidents, it's a big effing deal. There isn't a community in America, not a city, not a town, or rural hub, that doesn't have some glaring infrastructure problem requiring immediate attention. Busted roads make it harder for people to get to work. Dilapidated schools make it harder for kids to learn. Overtaxed seaports and railways and airports make it harder for goods to get to market, hurting businesses, raising prices on consumers, and hurting our economy. If America is to compete in this century, we can't do it with an infrastructure that's stuck in the last century. This infrastructure bill will help us meet the challenges of our time, strengthen our crucial supply chains, and lay the foundation for another generation of economic prosperity. This bill can be summed up by a four-letter word: J-O-B-S. Jobs, jobs, and more local jobs, more good-paying jobs, more union jobs. This bill will benefit every state, in very significant ways. In New York, my New York, major projects have been stalled for so long, like Gateway, the Cross Bronx Expressway, the 2nd Avenue Subway, I-81 in Syracuse, the Inner Loop in Rochester, will all have the ability to get going. And there are projects as important as these in every state across the country. Today's infrastructure bill will also begin the necessary efforts to prevent the worst of climate change, putting thousands of Americans to work by investing in resilience in our buildings and, crucially, beginning our task to make America's transportation system clean. It will finally bring millions of Americans online with high-speed internet, both in rural and underserved communities. New York alone still has over 1 million households without access or a subscription to broadband. We'll also help eliminate lead pipes in our water system, so one day parents won't have to worry if their kids are getting sick every time they turn on the faucet. Cities like Rochester still have 25,000 lead pipes that need replacement. 25,000. And today's legislation will also make driving safer in America. It'll require new cars to install drunk driving prevention technology. And it will make dangerous, largely unregulated vehicles like limos safer to use on the road. In the audience today, we have a great New Yorker, my friend Kevin Cushing. Kevin, where are you amid this big crowd? Thank you, Kevin. He's way back there. Kevin is the father of Patrick Cushing. Patrick died 3 years ago when he and 19 friends from the Amsterdam, New York area were celebrating a birthday, and they were killed in a limo crash in Schoharie. As the president deeply understands, that is a loss no parent should endure. It was horrific, preventable tragedy stemming from outdated federal rules and loopholes that allowed dangerous limos to operate on the road unchecked. In the face of the loss, rather than curse the darkness, Kevin and the families impacted that day lit a candle. Every day since that accident, they have pushed every single senator to support changes in our laws to make these vehicles safer to ride in. Today, their perseverance has paid off. Kevin, my friend, it was an honor to fight alongside you, and today Patrick is smiling down with pride. So, Mr. President, thank you for your leadership in achieving this long-sought goal on a bipartisan basis. The benefits go on and on. Thank you to all of my colleagues who pushed this infrastructure bill over the finish line, including our committee chairs and Speaker Pelosi, and everyone who reached across the aisle on this bipartisan achievement. Today's signing is a major and historic step forward, and we will keep working with you, Mr. President, to build on today's success by passing the rest of your Build Back Better agenda in the weeks ahead so we can keep our promises to help families achieve the American dream. Thank you, everybody. This is a great day for America.
Please welcome Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much to everyone who made today possible. I especially want to acknowledge President Biden for the glorious vision and the great commitment that he had to bring this legislation forward for the people. It is a great achievement. Thank you, Mr. President. When our nation was experiencing the depths of pandemic and economic crisis, you knew, Mr. President, that we needed not only to recover, but we had to seize the opportunity to build back better. Following your vision, Congress passed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, an historic step to rebuild the infrastructure and the middle class. Your agenda is historic, transformative, and the biggest, boldest investment in our country's history. I just want to talk about the history for a moment. The very first major infrastructure investment was President Thomas Jefferson's. He tasked the Secretary of Treasury, Gallatin, for the Gallatin Project to build the infrastructure to reach into our ever-growing nation, resulting in the Erie Canal, the Cumberland Road in Maryland, and other initiatives. Then, under President Lincoln and through legislation from Congress, America launched the Transcontinental Railroad, connecting the country from coast to coast. On the 100th anniversary of the Gallatin Project, President Theodore Roosevelt established the National Park Service to preserve God's beautiful natural patrimony of our country. And then President Eisenhower, years later, established the Interstate Highway System, initially a national security initiative, but significantly connecting America for commerce and communities. And today, Mr. President, with the stroke of your pen, we will take a giant step to achieve your vision, to build America's roads, bridges, water systems, and so much more, creating good-paying union jobs, and ensuring clean air and clean water, delivering better quality of life with equity, helping businesses thrive, and turbocharging our global competitiveness, connecting communities, again, through the internet, and making America safer as we protect our planet. And we do so building back better. This historic achievement was possible thanks to so many who have been acknowledged already, honors granted to all of them, to our chairs, members, and staff, who have in every step brought a depth of knowledge, commitment, and values-based leadership that is making a difference. Especially I salute in the House Transportation Infrastructure Chair, Peter DeFazio, a maestro of all things related to infrastructure and sustainability. I do want to acknowledge Mr. Clyburn, who was taking great pride, I think almost blushing, when our guest from the Carolinas was talking about broadband especially, but among other things. Thank you, Mr. Clyburn, for your leadership and all of that. May I just say and associate myself with the closing remarks of Mr. Schumer. This is a great accomplishment, and there's more to come. And so happy that hopefully this week we will be passing the Build Back Better to give tax cuts to America's working families, to create millions more jobs, to lower health care costs, and all of it paid for by making everyone pay his or her own fair share. I'll close by saying last week in Glasgow at the COP26, members were met with great enthusiasm over the Build Back Better agenda, which is a show of force to the world. As the president has said, America is back. With President Biden's signature, we show America's leadership for ourselves, for the people, and to the world. Thank you, Mr. President, and thank all of you.
Let's go.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States, accompanied by the Vice President of the United States and Heather Kurtenbach, a member of Iron Workers Local 86. welcome Heather Kurtenbach.
In a moment. Please have a seat. President Joe Biden, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, cabinet members, Congress members, governors and mayors, and my fellow Americans. This is an historic day. In the middle of the Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln started construction on the Transcontinental Railroad. In the middle of the Great Depression, President Franklin Roosevelt finished construction on the Hoover Dam. President Dwight Eisenhower signed the National Interstate and Defense Highways Act in the middle of the Cold War. And today, President Joe Biden will sign the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act into law. Indeed, is an historic day today. From the very start of our administration, we were determined to follow through, not just on our promise to invest in our nation's infrastructure, but on the promises that the American people have heard for years now. And we would not be here today were it not for your leadership, Mr. President. From the very start, you welcomed Democrats, independents, and Republicans to meet with us in the Oval Office. You welcomed ideas. You welcomed debate, all in the service of getting this bill done. And here is what I know to be true, Mr. President. You are equal parts believer and builder. And because you are, we are all better off. On behalf of our nation, thank you, Mr. President. And of course, our administration did not arrive at this day by ourselves. We are also here because of leaders in the House and the Senate who worked on this bill together, who voted for this bill. And we are here because of the millions of Americans who believed that we could get this done. Well, we got it done, America. We got it done. In many ways, this day embodies our character as a nation. It demonstrates exactly who we are. We are believers through and through. We see what can be unburdened by what has been. We are as bold as we are determined to do big things. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act proves that. It proves that in America, we have the courage to believe a better future is possible and to build it together. After this bill is signed into law, millions more Americans will go to work in good-paying, good union jobs. Americans like Jovan Johnson, a carpenter I met in Nevada, who said that she has, quote, built her career on infrastructure and fed her family on infrastructure. Americans like Jeff Bird, a line design technician I met with in New Hampshire. He attaches fiber to utility poles to keep up with the demand for high-speed internet. Or Leslie Kilgore, an engineer I met with in North Carolina, whose team is building electric school buses. Or Walter Cody, a construction inspector with whom I met, who is working to get clean water to families in California. This will be a nationwide effort, the likes of which we have not seen in a generation. It will make our country more competitive, and it will deliver on our nation's and our administration's commitment to equity. Now, this bill, as significant as it is, as historic as it is part one of two. To lower costs, and cut taxes for working families. To tackle the climate crisis at its core, Congress must also pass the Build Back Better Act. The work of building a more perfect union did not end with the railroad or the interstate, and it will not end now. So on this historic day, let us all continue to believe in our people, believe in our country, and believe in what we can do when we work together. Thank you all. May God bless you, and may God bless America.
Please welcome Heather Kurtenbach.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. As a proud union ironworker from Local 86 in Seattle, Washington, I am honored to be here at the White House on this historic day for workers like me and our country. I am an elected leader in my local union as a business agent and active in the Sisters Committee, which mentors newer ironworkers. Before I got where I am today, however, I had to overcome some challenges. In 2005, I was released from incarceration. While incarcerated, I was able to work on a wildland firefighting crew, sometimes heading out in the middle of the night to fight fires. That experience taught me a powerful work ethic and gave me lasting friendships. When I got out of prison, however, doors were closed to me. I searched for a job for 6 months with no offers. Finally, as a last-ditch effort, I asked my brother-in-law, a union ironworker, how he made a living. He told me, go to the union and apply. You could totally do this work. And I'm so glad that I did. I was accepted into, thank you. Yeah. I was accepted into the apprenticeship and went right out to a rebar job. I loved working rods and I fit right into the trade. I graduated from my apprenticeship at an uncertain time. The Great Recession 12 years ago was more of a depression for the construction industry. And many of my fellow journeyman workers, my coworkers, couldn't find work. Luckily, the Obama-Biden administration passed the Recovery Act that created a vital lifeline of jobs as the economy recovered. Yes. Just like this infrastructure law will do for workers today, enabling them to rebuild America and take care of their families over the coming years. Roads and bridges, rail, transit, airports, water, a whole generation of our nation's infrastructure will be built, creating good union jobs for people just like me. It invests in historically disadvantaged communities, creating jobs and opportunities for people of every race, gender, and background. I'm proud to stand here today and represent the most diverse labor movement in history. Nearly half of my local's apprentices are women or people of color. And this law empowers unions to keep building the middle class, leaving no one behind. Most of all, I'm proud to stand here as an American in this moment. In our line of work, you have to trust one another to get the job done. And throughout this process, I knew we could trust someone to get this law done. Someone who understands what workers like me are going through and who always believes in us and what we can do if given a chance. I never imagined in a million years that I would be standing here today. Yeah. But that's what's great about America. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. But that's what's so great about America and having a president who believes someone like me should be standing here. On behalf of Local 86 in Seattle and union workers everywhere, for the faith he's placing in us, I am honored to introduce the 46th President of the United States, Joe Biden.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank Thank you. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh, thank you. Heather, you're surprised you're standing here. Jill is very surprised I'm standing here. Well, Heather, thank you for the introduction. And I can't look over here because the sun's shining in my eyes, but all this other crowd over here, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for all you've done. Look, thanks for sharing this day with us. Why this day matters to you and your fellow iron workers and your families, and you explained it well. For all the folks at home, I know this day matters to you as well. I know you're tired of the bickering in Washington, frustrated by the negativity, and you just want us to use and focus on your needs, your concerns, and the conversations that are taking place at your kitchen table. Conversations as profound as they are ordinary. How do I find work? And how do I get there? How can our small business thrive and our child succeed in school? Or how do we emerge from this pandemic, not just with a little bit of breathing room, but with real fighting chance to get ahead? When we ran for president, I thought maybe I could help answer some of those questions for you and the needs you have. Because every time I'd ride home on Amtrak, I'd go through just north of just south of Baltimore. I'd look out, go through a suburban neighborhood. I'd look in all those lights are on in the windows, Nance, and I look and I wonder, what are they talking about? I'm serious. Swear to God. What are they talking about sitting at that table? What are they talking about? They're talking about the things that I talked about at our kitchen table, Jill at hers, and all of you as well. And that's about how can we come together to be president for all Americans, to make sure our democracy delivers for you, for all of you. And I promised that we couldn't just build back to what it was before. We literally had to build back better. You couldn't build back. We're the only country that's always come out of great crises stronger than we went in. And the world has changed, and we have to be ready. My fellow Americans today, I want you to know we hear you and we see you. The bill I'm about to sign along is proof that despite the cynics, Democrats and Republicans can come together and deliver results. We can do this. We can deliver real results for real people. We see in ways that really matter each and every day to each person out there. And we're taking a monumental step forward to build back better as a nation. I want to thank everyone who helped make this happen. Vice President Harris, my cabinet members, my White House team, Jill, Doug, our first lady, and our first lady and our second husband. No, I'm joking. These guys travel all over the country together. I'm getting worried, you know. And Doug's one hell of a lawyer besides. And everybody from the United States Senate, Majority Leader Schumer, and a group of Senate Democrats and Republicans who established this bipartisan framework, including representatives and all the folks you heard from. Senator Rob Portman is a really hell of a good guy. I'm not hurting you, Rob, because I know you're not running again. That's the only reason I say it. But you are a hell of a good guy. And the most determined woman I know, Senator Kristen Sinema. Congratulations, Kristen. Look, Committee Chair Tom Carper, Ranking Member Shelley Moore Capito. I also want to thank Minority Leader Mitch McConnell for voting for this bill and talking about how useful and important it is. And from the House of Representatives, Speaker Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, Jim Clyburn, and Committee Chair Pete DeFazio, Democrats and Republicans, progressives and moderates. I'd like to pause and ask all the committee chairs and ranking members of the United States Senate and House that are here today, please stand. Will all of you stand? Come on. All right. Thank you, thank you, thank you. To state the obvious, none of this would have happened without all of you. I really mean it. And also to the governors. Where are the governors? Governors, stand up. Come on, I want you to stand up. red states, blue states, you all contacted me. You all said you were for this. You all stepped up. And more than 375 mayors, Democrats and Republicans, from every state and District of Columbia, wrote me asking to get this done. You got it, kid. And nearly 50 of whom are here today, including Republican Mayor Fontana, who from Fontana, California, Mayor Warren, who spoke earlier, and county and state and tribal leaders as well, civil rights leaders, faith leaders, law. This law was supported by business groups, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the National Association of Manufacturers, the Business Roundtable, representing 200 of the largest corporations in America, and other top business. I want to especially thank, and I'm sure you'll all, as we used to say in the Senate, I stand point of personal privilege, I want to thank organized labor, who understands this about jobs. You all stood up. Jobs, 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 jobs. Special thanks to the AFL-CIO, the United Auto Workers, electrical workers, the IBEW, the iron workers. It goes on, plumbers, pipe fitters, and the building trades, steel workers. Who would I leave out? Pardon me? And my wife is a member of the union, the NEA. I'm going to get in trouble. Machinists, so many more. Look, folks, for too long, we've talked about having the best economy in the world. We've talked about asserting American leadership around the world with the best and the safest roads, railroads, ports, airports. Here in Washington, we've heard countless speeches and promises and white papers from experts. But today, we're finally getting this done. So my message to the American people is this: America's moving again, and your life is going to change for the better. If you live in one of the 10 million homes, or you're a child who attends one of the 400,000 schools or child care centers that still has lead pipes in them, you face a clear and present danger to your child's health and your health now. This law is going to start to replace 100% of the nation's lead pipes and service lines. So every American, every child can turn on the faucet and drink clean water. And tens of thousands of plumbers and pipe fitters are going to get work done in good paying jobs. Folks, as we saw with remote learning, remote working during the pandemic, access to high-speed internet is essential. And access to water as essential as access to water and electricity. This law is going to make high-speed internet affordable and available everywhere in America, urban, suburban, rural, and create jobs laying down those broadband lines. No parent, excuse me, no parent should have to sit in a parking lot at a fast food restaurant again, just so their child can use the internet to do their homework. That's over. And folks, if I visited your town, I'm sure you'd be able to tell me and where you hold your breath as you cross the particular bridge, or where the most dangerous intersection in your town is. This law makes us the most significant investment in roads and bridges in the past 70 years. It makes the most significant investment in passenger rail in the past 50 years, and in public transit ever. So what that means is you're going to be safer, and you're going to get there faster, and we're going to have a whole hell of a lot less pollution in the air. The bipartisan law will modernize our ports, our airports, our freight rail to make it easier for companies to get goods to market, reduce supply chain bottlenecks, as we're experiencing now, and lower cost for you and your family. The law also builds on our resilience so that the next storm, superstorm, drought, wildfire, hurricane can be dealt with. Last year alone, the United States, as a consequence of these kind of extreme weather events, lost $99 billion in the United States alone in damage. After Hurricane Ida, I see the distinguished governor from Louisiana is over there. I saw him stand up. I went down to see him. We went through and saw all the damage there. They had 179-mile-an-hour winds at top speed in Louisiana. But then I headed on up to New York. Chuck, we're up in your area, in the Queens, in New Jersey. More people died there than in the hurricane. More people died with the flooding. Record wildfires raged and I went to Idaho and California and saw it. More land is burned to the ground than the entire state of New Jersey out west. Folks, walk the neighborhoods and look the people in the eye in these circumstances, as many of you have, and you'll see the despair and the heartache. So many of you understand. You're living through it. This law builds back our bridges, our water systems, our power lines, our levees, better and stronger. So few Americans will be flooded out of their homes or lose power in those days and weeks as a consequence of storms that hit. Folks, this bipartisan law, for the first time ever, creates a true national network of charging stations for electric vehicles, over 500,000 of them, so you can charge your car here and drive all the way to California, not worrying about having to find places to charge, creating thousands of jobs, thousands. It is also going to make it possible for Americans to get off the sidelines and into the game of manufacturing, solar panels, wind turbines, batteries to store energy and power for electric vehicles, including electric school buses, which will mean millions of children will no longer inhale the dangerous diesel fumes that come out of the buses. For real, it's a big deal. And it'll reward companies for paying good wages and for buying American, sourcing their products here in America right now. It's going to help the United States export clean energy technologies to the world, creating tens of thousands of more jobs. There's so much more in the law, but most of all, it does something truly historic. I ran for president believing it was time to rebuild the backbone of this nation, which I characterize as working people in the middle class. They're the ones who built the country. And to rebuild the economy from the bottom up and the middle out. This law delivers on that long overdue promise, in my view. It creates better jobs for millions of Americans. And no one earning less than $400,000 a year will pay a single penny in federal taxes because of it. And it does not include, as we did the bipartisan infrastructure bill, it does not include a single penny in gas tax, which I rejected because people under $400,000 would be paying it. This law is a blue-collar blueprint to rebuild America. It leaves no one behind, and it marks an inflection point that we face as a nation. For most of the 20th century, we led the world by significant margin because we invested in ourselves. But somewhere along the way, we stopped investing in ourselves. We risked losing our edge as a nation, and China and the rest of the world are catching up. Our infrastructure used to be rated the best in the world. Now, according to the World Economic Forum, we rank 13th in the world. Well, that's about to change. Things are going to turn around in a big way. For example, because of this law, next year will be the first year in 20 years American infrastructure investment will grow faster than China's. We'll once again have the best roads, bridges, ports, and airports over the next decade. And we'll lead the world into the 21st century with modern cars and trucks and transit systems. We're going to do this by building again and moving again. Folks, too often in Washington, the reason we didn't get things done is because we insist on getting everything we want, everything. With this law, we focus on getting things done. I ran for president because the only way to move this country forward, in my view, was through compromise and consensus. That's how the system works. That's American democracy. And I'm going to be signing a law that is truly consequential because we made our democracy deliver for the American people. We compromised. We reached a consensus. That's necessary. And now our focus moves to implementing an infrastructure law that's going to, with speed and with discipline. I have a lot of experience in doing that. When I was vice president, I was given responsibility for overseeing and implementing the Recovery Act for nearly $900 billion emergency package. I'm proud to say that when we finished implementing that Recovery Act, it was determined that there had been less than 0.2% waste, fraud, or abuse. And it was how I learned and earned the nickname Sheriff Joe from President Obama, because I made it a point every single day for well over a year to stay on top of how the money was being used. I spoke with over 160 mayors, 2-3 times sometimes. And I spoke with county executives, and every governor save one. Well, I won't mention that. And save one. She could see Alaska from reports. But monitor what we're doing, to know just how it was being done. And it was one of the most efficient implementations of a major program in American history. And now we owe it to the American people to do the same thing again. And to make sure every penny is spent where it's supposed to go in a timely fashion, I've asked the former mayor of New Orleans and former lieutenant governor of Louisiana, Mitch Landrieu, to oversee this responsibility. He'll have full access to every tool the federal government has to get it done. And we have the high obligation and responsibility to make sure this money is used wisely and used well. Folks, I've been looking forward to this day for a long time, like all of my colleagues here have. Tomorrow, I'll be traveling to New Hampshire to visit a bridge that is structurally not safe, like thousands of bridges across America. That's what this law is all about, keeping communities safer and more efficient. On Wednesday, I'll be in Detroit to meet with the UAW workers who are building the next generation of electric vehicles. And that's just the beginning. We're also seeing you'll be seeing me and Vice President Harris, Jill and Doug, cabinet officials, hitting the road to help you understand how this is going to transform your lives for the better. And folks, when you see those projects starting in your hometowns, I want you to feel what I feel, pride. Pride in what we can do together as the United States of America. Folks, you know, the same goes for my plan to build back better for the people, getting folks back to work and reducing costs of things like child care, elder care, housing, health care, prescription drugs, and meeting the moment on climate change. I'm confident that the House will pass this bill, and then we're going to have to pass it in the Senate. And it's fully paid for. It will reduce the deficit over long term, according to the leading economists in the world. And again, no one earning less than $400,000 will pay a single penny more in federal taxes. And together with the infrastructure bill, millions of lives will be changed for the better. Folks, let me close with this. Throughout our history, we've emerged from crises by investing in ourselves. During and after the Civil War has been referenced, we built the Transcontinental Railroad, uniting East and West and uniting America. During the Cold War, we built the interstate highway system, transforming how America lived their lives. And now we're emerging from COVID-19 pandemic, and we'll build an economy for the 21st century. When I met with President of China, who I'm going to be speaking with tonight, several years ago, he asked me, we were in China, he said, could I define America? And I said, absolutely. It's the God's truth. I said, absolutely. I can define it in one word. Possibilities. Possibilities. There is no limit to what our people think we can do. And there is no limit to what our nation can do. And there is no one thing that I know more than this. It's never, ever been a good bet to bet against the American people. Never, never, never. Give it half a chance, the American people have never, ever, ever let this nation down. And it's our job to give our people that chance. It's our job to come together and make sure we remain a nation of possibilities. As I look out in this crowd today, I see Democrats and Republicans, national leaders, local leaders, all elected officials, labor leaders, business leaders, and most of all, I see fellow Americans. I see America. Let's remember this day. Let's remember we can come together. And most of all, let's remember what we've got done for the American people when we do come together. I truly believe that 50 years from now, historians are going to look back at this moment and say, that's the moment America began to win the competition of the 21st century. So with confidence, optimism, with vision and faith in each other, let's believe in possibilities. Let's believe in one another. And let's believe in America. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Now let me sign this bipartisan bill.
Take the Vice President, take it out of your way, sir. Good man. There you go. Yes, sir.
Well, my mask.
Oh, boy. I don't need a mask outside.
Guess I don't.
This is me.
Yeah, we're right here.
Hey guys, much appreciated.
We were wondering when you were going to stop for a moment and never frozen it.
I tell you what, I know what you mean. It's the only reason I did stop. Well, folks, I'm going to get you each a pen, but there's 30 of you up here. I only have one pen with me.
Sorry, Vice President, please.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
Bravo. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Good job. Everybody gets one. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Today, I'm witnessing an investment in America by Justin Trudeau. I am so proud.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? All members of Congress, the shuttles are ready to load. Please proceed to the East Wing entrance. All members of Congress, the shuttle is ready to load. Please proceed to the East Wing entrance.
Washington Post, 27.
The House is back in session at 5 p.m. Eastern to debate 5 bills dealing with veterans issues. Recorded votes are scheduled for 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. When the House comes back into session, you can watch it live here on C-SPAN. This week on the C-SPAN networks, both chambers of Congress are in session. The House will take up President Biden's Build Back Better social spending plan after House Speaker Nancy Pelosi delayed a vote on the bill before the Veterans Day recess. The delay came at the request of some moderate Democrats who wanted the Congressional Budget Office to analyze the bill. On Tuesday at 10 a.m. Eastern, live on C-SPAN 3, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas testifies in an oversight hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee. The hearing was postponed last month after Secretary Mayorkas tested positive for COVID-19. Also at 10, live on cspan.org and the C-SPAN Now mobile video app, the leading cybersecurity experts from the White House, Homeland Security, and the FBI will testify before the House Oversight and Reform Committee on strategies to crack down on ransomware attacks, disrupt hackers, and build resilience against cyber threats. On Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern, live on C-SPAN 3, the confirmation hearing for Federal Communications Commission Chair nominee Jessica Rosenworcel before the Senate Commerce Committee. If confirmed, she'll be the first woman to serve in this capacity. The committee will also take up other nominations, including Alvaro M. Bedoya for Commissioner of the Federal Trade Commission. And at 10:30 a.m. Eastern on cspan.org and the C-SPAN Now mobile video app, a virtual meeting of the House Appropriations Subcommittee to discuss the U.S. role in global COVID vaccine equity. Watch this week on the C-SPAN networks, or you can watch our full coverage on C-SPAN Now, our new mobile video app. Also, head over to cspan.org for scheduling information or to stream video live or on demand anytime. C-SPAN, your unfiltered view of government.
Look now beyond the usual red versus blue divide in America. Carol Darty joins us. He's a director of political research at the Pew Research Center, and he's helped oversee the center's work on American political typology. So Carol Darty, explain first what political typology is.
Well, it's an unusual study. Thanks for having me. First off, it's an unusual study in the sense that we look at the landscape through a different lens, not just through party, but we look at people's values and attitudes, and on that basis break them down into different distinct groups based on those values and attitudes. And our new study just came out last week, and we find nine different groups across the political spectrum, 4 Democratic and 4 Republican, and 1 basically in the middle. And so it's a different kind of study that shows a diversity of views within each partisan coalition.
Before we dig into those 9 groups, who did you ask these questions to, and how did you come up with 9 groups?
Well, we asked it of more than 10,000 Americans a couple of months ago on our online American Trends panel, and we did this through a statistical process called clustering, where your attitudes draw you within a group, the attitudes on key issues and political values sort of place you in the group. And we did a lot of statistical analysis, and that's how we came up with these different distinct groups.
this might be one of those segments for our viewers where if you have the ability to go online as you're watching, it might help here, because we're going to be talking about a lot of different groups in political typology. The report is available at pewresearch.org. Carol Daugherty, start on the right. The 4 different groups you break down the Republican Party into, starting with the faith and flag conservatives. How are they different from the other groups on the right?
Well, they're consistent conservatives across all issues, and very, very conservative, and you know, even more conservative than the average Republican, say, on almost every issue. And it's not as if there are issues where there are exceptions. There are very few exceptions, and they're older people. Many of them live in rural areas. They're obviously solid Republicans. Nearly all voted for Donald Trump in 2020, not a surprise there. And they're highly politically engaged. I mean, they pay attention to politics, high voting participation, really, you know, kind of an anchor of the Republican Party.
Some 10% of the general public, you believe, are faith and flag conservatives. 7% of the general public, or 15% of the Republican Party, are committed conservatives. What are they?
Well, they're a little bit different. I mean, they're also very conservative, of course, based on their name, as you can see. But they're not quite, you know, there are some, you know, areas where they might diverge from other groups in the Republican coalition. They're a little more supportive of working closely with U.S. allies in foreign policy, for instance. And, you know, you know, going back to the former president, you know, that while they voted for Donald Trump at very high rates, extraordinarily high rates, you know, almost all voted for him in 2020. And again, pretty politically engaged. They're not quite as high on the president in terms of his political future, and they're less likely than the faith and flag conservatives to say they want him to run for another term. So a few reservations there, and some reservations on issues as well. They're just not quite as conservative, hardcore conservative on every issue as the faith and flag conservatives.
Another large chunk of the Republican Party, the populist right, representing some 23% of the Republican Party. Who are they?
Well, they're a very interesting group in the sense that they too all are very strong Trump supporters, and on social issues in particular, especially on immigration, very conservative attitudes, very anti-immigration. But on economic attitudes, they really diverge from a lot of Republican Party positions. For instance, they're highly critical of U.S. corporations and business. The majority says that tax rates on high income should be raised. They're more in favor of raising taxes on corporations. They're cynical about the fairness of the economic system, and in that regard, they're closer to Democrats than they are to other Republicans. I mean, on most issues, they really do toe the party line, but not on economic policy. That's where they really are very different kinds of Republicans.
And then about a fifth of the Republican Party are the ambivalent right. Who are they?
Well, they're also a very interesting group in that they're the youngest group in the Republican coalition. They hold more mixed views, especially they're more supportive of legal abortion, more supportive of legalizing marijuana than some of the other Republican groups, and so they're not quite as hardcore conservative as some of the other Republican groups. And you know, while most of them voted for Donald Trump, this is a group that actually is kind of mixed politically. It's 2/3 Republican, 1/3 Democrats. Again, this is based on their values and attitudes. And so they're a little bit more of a swing group, if there is one in politics today. They're not exactly going to vote for Democrats, but you know they're not that highly engaged, and it's, you know, some of them their participation in politics is pretty low. They're not that drawn to politics in the same way that some of the more ideologically oriented groups are in the typology.
That's the red. Let's go to the blue, representing some 6% of the general public, just about 12% of the Democratic Party. Is the progressive left? Who are they?
Well, they're kind of the bookend from the faith and flag conservatives on the right. They're liberal on almost every issue, and very, animated about the need for change in this country in a liberal direction. More than 60% say the government, favor not only bigger government, but say the social safety net needs to be greatly expanded. They're the group that really wants to address racism by just rebuilding institutions and because they're fundamentally racially biased. They're the only group, interestingly, they're the only group of Democrats in the Democratic coalition that's majority white, non-Hispanic, but they hold very highly liberal views across the board, and again, like the faith and flag conservatives on the right, they're very highly engaged. They're voted high levels, followed politics and public affairs. Most of them very intensely.
About a quarter of the Democratic Party is the establishment liberals. Who are they?
Well, they're different from the progressive left in the sense that they are, they're liberal across the board as well, but a little less supportive of sweeping change to achieve liberal objectives. They're not quite as their views are a little more tempered in that regard, and they're more mixed, more racially and ethnically diverse, but they're not quite as liberal as the progressive left.
And then two more groups on the left. It's the Democratic mainstays that represent some 28% of the Democratic Party. Who are they?
Well, they're the largest Democratic group within the typology, the largest Democratic-oriented group, and they again are more moderate, than the other two groups on the left. They're, for instance, on an issue like immigration, legal immigration, they're not as supportive of increasing legal immigration as some of the other Democratic groups. They hold more moderate views on a variety of issues, and so they're a large group, very strong supporters of Joe Biden, and in fact, during the presidential primaries, they're the group that stood out because they've been with President Biden from the beginning. In fact, unlike some of the other Democratic groups who favored other candidates during the primaries. And so they're basically really core Democrats, and they're the largest group, as I said.
And finally, the outsider left, representing some 16% of the Democratic Party. Who are they?
Yes, they're the youngest group in the entire political typology. I mean, they're very young, and they're very liberal on most issues. Yet, unlike in really striking contrast to, say, the Democratic mainstays, they're critical of the Democratic Party. From a liberal perspective, they're not, they're kind of unhappy with the direction of the party. In fact, they feel a little left out politically for the most part. Most of them, certainly all of those who voted for Joe Biden in 2020, but they're not really happy. They're not really, kind of that attached to the Democratic Party. But of course, in a two-party system, they're not going to vote for the Republicans. So that's where they land. But this is a group that's really interesting to watch because they're so young.
This is one of those days where I wish we had 9 phone lines to give out, but we're splitting our phone lines as usual this way. Democrats 202-748-8000, Republicans 202-748-8001, Independents 202-748-8002. Let us know which one of those typologies struck you. Which one is closest to your beliefs? We're talking about this new report from the Pew Research Center, and there's one more group in the typology, and you call them the stressed sideliners, some 15% of the country. Who are they?
Well, they're the politically mixed group, and this is a group that's about evenly divided between Republicans and Democrats. But what distinguishes them is their low rates of political participation. So in effect, you have this independent group that sort of, they do vote. Some of them do vote, of course, but many of them don't. And so, in a sense, they are the swing vote, the true kinds of swing voters that in a close election certainly can decide elections. But often they choose to sit out elections. They don't follow public affairs and politics that closely. As we say, they're stressed. They're financially stressed, and so this is a group that's It's kind of interesting as well in the sense that they have this in a polarized environment. They're the group that stands out for being mixed politically, yet they're not that engaged by politics.
If it's okay to bring up Gallup to the Pew Research Service, the Pew Research Center, I wonder why the latest political affiliation survey from Gallup says it's 26% of the American public that says they're Republicans, 26% that says they're Democrats, but this big group in the middle are independents. They say 44% of people identify as independents. So square that with what you're saying is just a 15% group of Americans who are really in the middle, though they may not participate or participate not so much.
Well, we've been finding the same thing, that the share of self-described independents has been growing over the last 20 years. Our data is very, very similar to that. And you know, this is not all it seems to be, because many of those independents, if not most of them, lean to one party or another. What does that mean? It means that they don't want to formally affiliate or identify as Republicans or Democrats, but they have a partisan leaning. In other words, on most issues, they're gonna line up with the Democrats or the Republicans. And in fact, in the typology, the three groups closest to the middle, the outsider left, the stressed sideliners, and the ambivalent right, all have very high shares of self-described independents. Now, in the case of the outsider left, most of them lean to the Democratic Party. In the case of the ambivalent right, most of them lean to the Republican Party. But you know, they're still independent. And so it's consistent with the large share of independents you see in the public, but they have a partisan leaning. And they vote with that party. They tend to vote with that party. It's really only when you really dig a little bit deeper that you see the stressed sideliners there, who are the most politically mixed, and in fact not leaning one way or the other towards either party.
So are you saying that there's Republicans who, in your typology, have more in common with some Democrats than they do with maybe some of the people at the farthest extreme of their own party?
Sure, absolutely. That's one of the key findings of the survey, especially among the ambivalent right, as I said, on some of those social issues. The populist right, I think it's very interesting to see how they not exactly line up with Democrats, but certainly come pretty close to the mainstream Democratic view on some economic policy issues, even as they certainly share the Republican views on immigration, race, and size of government and other issues.
About a half an hour left in our program with Carol Daugherty this morning of the Pew Research Center. Phone lines are open for you to call, and we have several calls for you. Karen, Leesburg, Virginia, Democrat. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. And you took the words out of my mouth. I consider myself probably more independent, but I consider myself center-left because I'm a Democrat. But I have a question about West Virginia, because I live in Virginia that borders West Virginia. So I don't understand how you have a base of constituents that say that they're Republican. They have a Democratic governor, a state senator, but then they're considered as one of the poorest states in the country. They strongly live on socialist values, social services, social experiences. So I don't understand how they call themselves Republicans, but then they don't want to be called themselves as socialists, but they take advantage and live on every socialist program that's out there. And in hindsight, we have Joe Manchin that is all over the place. So I'm trying to understand that dynamic for people who call themselves Republican but don't act like it.
Carol Daugherty.
Well, people's political attitudes are very complicated and aren't always consistent. I mean, West Virginia, kind of a state that's in transition, voted very strongly for Donald Trump in 2020. Yet, as you note, it has a Democratic senator who's playing a key role in the budget debates and many other debates in Congress. And you know, there are a lot of vestigial Democrats left in West Virginia. They may have even a party registration as a Democrat. You know, the West Virginia has moved from very Democratic to very Republican over the last generation or so, and they may still have their old party registration as a Democrat. They don't really consider themselves, many of those people who have switched don't consider themselves as Democrats anymore. So it's a state in transition. In terms of the government programs, I mean, people vote on a lot of different issues, cultural issues, economic issues, size of government. And so it's a question of which ones they choose to make most important in their voting decisions. And it's interesting that Senator Manchin, he'll be up in a few years, but he's won election in West Virginia as a moderate to conservative Democrat. At the same time, the state does strongly support Republican candidates for president.
New York City, this is Sean, independent. Good morning.
Good morning. So I just heard you just say that, people typically vote on various issues, but then, you put them into these, type categories. I just want to know, where do you yourself fit into these categories?
Well, I have to admit, I will use this opportunity to sort of plug our quiz where you can figure out where you fit, the typology quiz, which is a few questions you answer, and you'll line up with one of the groups. This is not a dodge. This is actually true. I've taken the quiz so many times because I want to make sure that that if you take the quiz from a certain point of view, that you end up in the right group. So I've tested it so often, I'm not sure if I've ever really taken it on my own. I'll just use that as a dodge. And we at the Pew Research Center, we're nonpartisan and not affiliated with either party and non-advocacy. So we don't really take political positions. But in terms of the typology quiz, I have taken it a number of times. And, I will want to take it as a test to make sure that the groups line up the right way based on their attitudes and values. So I've never taken it actually as an individual.
What do you hope comes from learning this, from better understanding this?
While we always talk about polarization, and it's a real fact of American political life, that there's a diversity and a complexity to people's political views that it also exists in this polarized environment. That the landscape is a lot more complicated than people might think just looking at these red versus blue dynamics.
When it comes to what everybody always focuses on is the next election down the road, right. Which of these groups, these 9 different groups, the 4 on the right, the 4 on the left, which are the most politically engaged? If you're somebody running for election, who's your base? Who's the people who are definitely coming out to vote?
Well, that's a great question. It's the most ideological groups on the left and right, those faith and flag conservatives, populist right, committed conservatives on the right, the progressive left, the Democratic mainstays, and the establishment liberals on the left. These are sort of the core groups in each party. It's interesting. We're a long way from the 2022 election, but one of the things that we did that part of the survey, this is based on several surveys when I told you about the 10,000 sample size, but we did that part of the survey about the congressional midterms in September, so it's a couple of months old, but already very high engagement, especially among those ideologically oriented groups. Large majorities say it really matters which party controls Congress. Not so much those groups in the middle. They're much less likely to say that. So the question is, especially when you move into the general election, do these middle groups, the South Side or left, ambivalent right, and the stress silenters, do they turn out to vote? What's going to motivate them? And that's going to be the test for both parties.
San Carlos, California. Cindy, Republican. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for C-SPAN. Mr. Doherty, I often use Pew Research when I'm looking up a subject, but I did want to ask, when you classified under Republicans, when you say that we're anti-immigration, are you asking about illegal immigration with caravans coming up and coming across and people being coached on asylum, or are you talking about legal immigration, which I don't feel Any Republicans are against.
Well, actually, a lot of Republicans are against increasing the rate of legal immigration. Certainly, they're not. Many of them would like to reduce the amount of legal immigration in the country. That's probably a shorthand. You're right to make the distinction between views on illegal immigration and trying to stop the flow across the border and things like that versus legal immigration. But we do see very big differences between the partisan coalitions and sometimes within them about the rate of legal immigration as well. And the populist right in particular stands out for being highly skeptical of legal immigration.
To Ira in Hudson, Florida, a Republican. Good morning. Ira, are you with us? Then to David in Germantown, Maryland, Democrat. Good morning.
Good morning, C-SPAN, and good morning, Mr. Daugherty. And I have a quick question. I have a question related to extremism and violence. FBI recently published that there is really growing concern about extremism on both sides. I myself consider myself Democrat, moderate. Could you please go into detail and target one of your groups or maybe two of the groups on both sides, which one is most violent and most extreme according to FBI? And thank you very much, C-SPAN, for bringing this amazing topic, and have a blessed day.
Well, it's very difficult to ask about political violence. It's a fraught subject. It's a very difficult subject for a lot of Americans to answer. We don't see a great deal of support in the abstract for political violence among any of these groups. You know, small shares saying it could be justified in some way, but as I say, you know, you'll see some polling, some surveys that show large percentages, relatively large percentages would take the option to use political violence in a certain scenario. It's a very difficult question to ask about when you ask, would you consider political violence for political ends? And it's something, you know, you have to be very careful about when you're asking about it.
I know you mentioned the survey that viewers can go to pewresearch.org to find your own political typology, where you fit in this chart. Jody offers this up for you, Mr. Daugherty, and take it as you will. Not doing the 15 questions, but she asks, what am I? I'm fiscally conservative. I'm socially liberal. I want to work hard and make money to spend on the people that I love. What category am I?
You might be in one of those three groups in the middle. You're kind of cross-pressured politically, it sounds like, Jody, and you might land in one of those three groups, so it'll be interesting to see where you actually do land. You know, it's a combination of views that places you in one of these groups, and take the quiz and see where you end up.
The groups, again, the faith and flag conservatives on the right, the committed conservatives, populist right, the ambivalent right. In the middle, the 15% of Americans in the middle are the stress sideliners. And then on the left, there's the outsider left, the Democratic mainstays, the establishment liberals, and progressive left. 9 political types that the Pew Research Center has come up with. And you've done this survey before. Has it always been 9?
No, we do it new each time. This is the 8th over. We've done it since 1987, if you can believe it. You know, the former president, the late president of the Pew Research Center, Andrew Kohut, who founded the center, started this in 1987. So it's been around for a long time. It's had the same basic structure, but we've obviously changed the questions over the years. We've changed the statistical method for coming up with the groups. We've changed a lot of things. And the number of groups kind of varies, and the types of groups, and it reflects the current, you know, kind of landscape in politics each time. So it's done new each time.
To Brooklyn, this is Andy, independent. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for C-SPAN. John, great to see you back. I have a question for Mr. Carroll, Dr. Daugherty. The effects of Republican oil-led states like Texas and Florida and the Midwest, state senators controlling oil prices, causing pain on American families, especially right before the holidays. Can you talk to the fact that corporations focus mostly on keeping Americans in a certain class to vote for them? And can you discuss how they control the political PACs that only focus on lowering their tax liability? I think it's time for the Republican Party to focus on corporations being more responsible to America and helping us grow. Can you talk on that, please?
Well, this is an area that divides Democrats and Republicans. You know, you see the four groups on the Democratic side of the typology saying the economic system in the United States is really not fair to most Americans. But you find one Republican group, the populist right, saying that as well. So it's not completely partisan. But it's a viewpoint out there, and people are critical of corporations. We've seen Republicans actually become more critical of corporations over the past couple of years. So it's certainly an issue that's out there, but most of the criticism is clearly among the left and among Democrats, and they're the groups that, for the most part, again, except for this populist right, want to raise tax rates on corporations and businesses.
Aubrey with a question for you from Twitter. Precisely what does politically engaged actually mean? Does that term denote interest as opposed to both interest and the acquiring of accurate information?
Well, it does. It's a good question. It's both participation in politics, meaning voting for the most part, and also whether you follow it. You know, our question is, do you follow government and politics, you know, pretty regularly? And so how often do you pay attention to the news? It's not really based on any particular sources or specific sources of information, just a general measure of your interest in politics.
Just about 15 minutes before the end of our program. Phone lines again, Democrats 202-748-8000. Republicans 202-748-8001, and Independents 202-748-8002. PewResearch.org is where you can go to find the political typology report that came out just last week. Carol Doherty, the director of political research there, joining us this morning, taking your phone calls. And this is Dan out of Georgetown, Massachusetts, an independent. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on. I'm really curious about the segment of the voters that actually got Joe Biden into office. And that segment of voter would be the unverified absentee vote. And wouldn't it be interesting to find out where all these unverified absentee votes came from and what their political persuasion was? And I'm saying this because this last cycle of a presidential election, we saw an overwhelming number of voters come in unseen before. Joe Biden got the most votes ever in the history of the United States for a president, and Trump was right there with it. So we had an overwhelming flood of unverified absentee voters, and I would wager a very large amount of money that nearly